They called him the King of Wall Street, a man who thought everything had a price tag. She was just the invisible girl refilling his water glass, earning minimum wage while drowning in debt. But when billionaire Grant Sterling placed a £50 antique titanium safe on the table and jokingly yelled, "Open this, and $100 million is yours," he made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't look at her hands. He didn't know whose daughter she was. And he certainly didn't expect the click that would silence the entire room and destroy his empire. This is the story of the bet that changed everything. The air inside the gilded cage always smelled of cold money. It was a specific scent, a mixture of aged leather, imported truffle oil, expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of chilled platinum credit cards. For Clara Vance, that smell was the scent of survival. Clara adjusted her black waistcoat, ensuring the white napkin draped over her left arm was perfectly creased. She was 24, with pale skin that hinted at a lack of sunlight and dark circles under her eyes that she expertly concealed with cheap concealer. To the patrons of the Gilded Cage, the most exclusive members-only supper club in Manhattan, she wasn't a person. She was a moving fixture, a pair of floating hands that delivered scotch and cleared away plates of half-eaten lobster. "Table 4 needs a refill on the Dom Perignon," whispered Lucas, the floor manager. Lucas was a nervous man who sweated profusely despite the aggressive air conditioning. "And Clara? Be careful, it's Sterling tonight." Clara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Grant Sterling, the tech mogul who had recently pivoted to high-stakes venture capital. He was worth $40 billion and possessed the emotional intelligence of a sledgehammer. He was known for tipping either $5,000 or zero, depending on whether he found the server aesthetically pleasing that evening. "I've got it, Lucas," Clara said, her voice steady. She didn't have a choice. In the locker room, buried deep in her purse, was a final notice from the Oak Haven Memory Care Facility. Her father, Tobias, was in the late stages of early-onset dementia. The facility provided the only specialized care that kept his panic attacks at bay. But the cost was astronomical. If she didn't come up with $12,000 by Friday, he would be evicted, cast out into the state system that would surely kill him. Clara picked up the chilled bottle, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and made her way across the velvet-carpeted floor. Table 4 was the center of gravity in the room. Grant Sterling sat at the head, surrounded by an entourage of sycophants, mostly junior VPs, and a few Instagram models who looked bored. Grant was a handsome man in a predatory way, with slicked-back hair and a smile that never reached his cold blue eyes. But tonight, the centerpiece of the table wasn't the food. It was a box. It sat heavily on the white tablecloth, pushing down the silverware. It was a cube of dark, matte metal, roughly the size of a microwave, but clearly incredibly heavy. It lacked digital keypads or biometric scanners. Instead, it had a single, complex brass dial with strange engravings, not numbers. "It's impenetrable," Grant was booming, his voice carrying over the low hum of jazz. "Cost me $3 million at the Geneva auction. It's a Kensington black. Only 3 were ever made in 1928. The legend says the locksmith who built it went mad trying to create a lock that God himself couldn't pick." "And nobody can open it?" asked one of the VPs, a man named Brad. "Nobody," Grant grinned, tapping the metal with a heavy gold ring. "I've had the best crackers in the city try. Lasers, stethoscopes, nothing works. It has a false heartbeat mechanism. It mimics the clicks of the tumblers to confuse you. It's a tomb." Clara approached the table silently. "More champagne, Mr. Sterling?" Grant didn't look up. He just waved a hand dismissively. "Pour. And don't spill it on the safe. It's worth more than your life." The table chuckled. It was a cruel, casual sound. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her hand steady. As she poured the golden liquid, her eyes drifted to the safe. Her breath hitched. She knew that metal. She knew the specific oxidized hue of the brass dial. She recognized the engraving on the side, a small, stylized hawk. It wasn't just a Kensington, it was the Kensington prototype. And she knew it because she used to play with the blueprints for this exact mechanism when she was 6 years old. It was the mechanism her father, Tobias Vance, had spent 20 years studying and replicating in his workshop before his mind began to fade. "It's a beautiful piece," Clara said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The laughter at the table died instantly. The rule at the gilded cage was simple. The help does not speak unless spoken to. Grant Sterling slowly turned his head. He looked at her waist, then her chest, and finally, lazily, up to her eyes. "Excuse me." "The safe," Clara said, clutching the champagne bottle tighter. "It's a Kensington Black, but it's the second iteration. You can tell by the hawk engraving. The first one had an eagle." Silence stretched across the table. Brad, the VP, looked terrified for her. Grant stared at her for a long moment, and then a wide, mocking grin split his face. He clapped his hands together. "Well, look at this. A scholar in an apron. Did you hear that, boys? She knows her history." He stood up, towering over her. "You like safes, sweetheart?" My father was a locksmith," Clara said quietly. "I grew up around them." "A locksmith," Grant sneered. "A guy who fixes bathroom doors, I assume." "This isn't a bathroom door, honey. This is a fortress." He grabbed his glass of champagne, downed it, and then looked at his friends with a gleam of pure malice in his eyes. He was bored. He wanted entertainment, and Clara was the perfect victim. "Tell you what," Grant said, his voice booming so the neighboring tables could hear, "since you're such an expert, since you think you know what this is." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a fountain pen. He scribbled something on a linen napkin and slammed it onto the table. "I'm feeling generous. I'm feeling lucky." Grant gestured to the safe. "Open it." "Sir?" Clara whispered. "Open it!" Grant shouted, laughing. "If you can crack this unbreakable safe right now, in front of everyone, I'll give you what's inside, and I'll add a bonus." He looked around the room, ensuring he had an audience. "I'll wire $100 million to any account you want, right here, tonight." The promise of $100 million hung in the air like smoke. A hush fell over the gilded cage. Diners at other tables, politicians, heiresses, oil tycoons stopped chewing. The jazz band in the corner even lowered their volume, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Grant Sterling was known for his manic episodes of wealth flexing, but this was extreme even for him. "You're joking, sir," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I should get back to work." "I never joke about money," Grant spat, his jovial demeanor hardening. He leaned in close, smelling of expensive scotch. "You spoke up. You interrupted my dinner to correct me about the engraving. Now back it up, or are you just another person pretending to be smarter than they are?" "Grant, leave the girl alone," one of the models muttered, looking uncomfortable. "No," Grant snapped. "She thinks she knows better. Let's see." He turned back to Clara. $100 million. Or you walk away, apologize for interrupting, and you're fired. Right now. I'll have Lucas throw you out the back door. Clara looked at Lucas. The manager was standing by the kitchen doors, pale and shaking his head. He wouldn't save her. Nobody would save her. She looked down at the safe. $100 million. It was an absurdity. A number so large it didn't feel real. But even a fraction of that, even if he was lying and only gave her 1,000, it would save her father. She looked at the dial. The Kensington Black didn't work like modern safes. It didn't rely on numbers. It relied on feel. It relied on the tension of the internal springs. It was a kinetic puzzle. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Clara, listen to the metal. It sings. Every lock wants to be opened. It's their nature. You just have to ask it politely." She remembered the nights in the workshop, her small hands on cold steel, her father guiding her fingers. He had taught her the Vance touch, a method of applying counter-torque to the dial while vibrating the handle to feel the gates align. It was a lost art. "Well," Grant taunted, "clock is ticking, Cinderella." Clara set the champagne bottle down on the side table. The glass clinked loudly in the silence. She unbuttoned the cuffs of her uniform shirt and rolled them up, revealing pale, slender forearms. She wiped her hands on her apron to remove any moisture. "I need silence," Clara said. Her voice was no longer the voice of a waitress. It was the voice of a technician. Grant laughed. "You need silence? Everyone, shut up! The genius is at work." He gestured for the band to stop. The room went deathly quiet. 100 pairs of eyes were fixed on her. Clara stepped up to the table. Up close, the safe was intimidating. It was cold, menacing, and built to withstand a bomb. But as she laid her hand on the brass dial, she felt a strange warmth. She closed her eyes. "Focus. Forget the money. Forget the crowd. It's just you and the mechanism." She placed her left ear against the cold steel of the box. She placed her right fingertips on the dial. She spun it hard to the left to clear the mechanism. Whoa! The sound was smooth, like silk sliding over glass. "She's actually trying," someone whispered. "Shh," Grant hissed, grinning like a shark. Clara began the work. She applied pressure to the handle, creating a binding point. She turned the dial slowly, extremely slowly. Click. A false gate. Grant had been right. It had a heartbeat mechanism designed to fool safecrackers. Most people would have stopped there, thinking they had the first number. But Clara felt the slight vibration, the mushiness in the contact area. It was a trap. She bypassed it. She continued turning. The room was so quiet she could hear the breathing of the man next to her. 10 minutes passed. Grant Sterling's smile was beginning to fade. He had expected her to fumble for 30 seconds, get embarrassed, and run away crying. He had expected a quick humiliation to assert his dominance. But Clara hadn't moved. She was in a trance. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her hands were surgically steady. She had found the first 2 gates. The combination wasn't a number sequence. It was a geometric pattern. Left to the tension point, right 3 rotations, left to the catch. She was fighting the machine. The springs inside were heavy, resisting her. Her fingers ached. "Don't force it, Clara," her father's memory whispered. "If you force it, the lock seizes. It's like a conversation. Be gentle." She eased off the pressure. She felt the 3rd tumbler drop. Clunk. It was a deeper sound, a true sound. The crowd gasped. Even Grant looked startlingly at the box. He leaned forward, his arrogance replaced by a flicker of unease. "Luck," he muttered. "She just got lucky with a tumbler." Clara didn't hear him. She was on the final stage. The Kensington Black had a final security measure, a dead man's drop. If you spun the final rotation too fast, a steel bolt would slam into place, permanently locking the safe and requiring a drill to open it. She had to be perfect. She rotated the dial millimeter by millimeter. Her fingertips were burning. The tension in the room was suffocating. Lucas, the manager, was holding his breath, clutching a menu to his chest. Clara felt the slide. The final gate was aligning. It was a microscopic movement of brass against steel. She held her breath. She turned it one last hair's breadth. Click. The sound was sharp, decisive, and loud. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the club. Clara let go of the dial. She stepped back, her chest heaving. She looked at Grant Sterling. "It's unlocked," she said. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Grant stared at the safe. He stared at her. His face went red, then pale. "Bullshit," he whispered. "Open it," Clara challenged him. It was the first time she had ever given an order to a customer. Grant looked around. He couldn't back down. Too many people were watching. Some had their phones out, recording. The King of Wall Street couldn't be afraid of a box. He reached out his manicured hand and grabbed the heavy iron handle. He pulled. With a heavy groan of well-oiled hinges, the door of the safe swung open. The room erupted. People jumped to their feet. A few applauded, but Grant didn't move. He froze, staring into the dark cavity of the safe. It wasn't empty. Clara, expecting to see stacks of cash or perhaps diamonds, leaned in slightly. Inside the safe, sitting on a velvet cushion, was not money. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger, old and cracked, and a small silver picture frame. Grant's hand shook as he reached in and pulled out the picture frame. He turned it over. It was a black and white photograph of two men standing in front of a workshop. One was a young, ruthless-looking man in a sharp suit, a young Grant Sterling. The other was a man in a workman's apron, smiling broadly, holding a patent blueprint. Clara gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She knew the man in the apron. "That's," she stammered. "That's my father." Grant dropped the photo as if it burned him. It clattered onto the table, the glass cracking. "Where did you get this?" Clara demanded, her voice rising. "That's Tobias Vance. That's my dad." Grant looked up, and for the first time, the billionaire looked terrified. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at a ghost. "The deal," a voice called out from a nearby table. It was an older man, a judge who frequented the club. "The deal was 100 million, Grant." She opened it. Grant snapped his head toward the judge. "The deal was a joke. It was banter." "It didn't sound like a joke," the judge said, standing up. "And it seems like there's more to this story than a simple lock, Mr. Sterling." Grant slammed the safe door shut, nearly catching his own fingers. "Show's over," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Get out, everyone, and you." He pointed a shaking finger at Clara. "You're fired. Get out of my sight before I have you arrested for tampering." "Tampering." Clara stepped forward, fueled by a sudden, hot rage. "I didn't touch it with anything but my hands," you challenged me. "But that photo. Why do you have a photo of you and my father? My father says his partner stole his life's work 30 years ago. He says a man named Sterling took the patents for the Omnilock and left him to rot." The restaurant went dead silent again. This was no longer a parlor trick. This was a scandal unfolding in real time. Grant's face twisted into a snarl. "Your father was a drunk and a fool. He didn't invent anything. I built my empire." "Me?" "Then why?" Clara said, her voice cutting through the air. "Is the combination to the safe my birthday?" Grant froze. "I felt the numbers," Clara said, tears pricking her eyes as the realization hit her. 10/24 to 98. Left, right, left. That was the combination. October 24th, 1998. That's the day I was born. She looked at the safe, then at Grant. "This isn't your safe, Mr. Sterling. You didn't buy this at an auction in Geneva. This was my father's masterpiece. the one that went missing from his workshop the night his business burned down. The silence that had gripped the gilded cage shattered like a dropped crystal glass. "Security!" Grant Sterling roared, his face a mask of purple rage. He lunged across the table, his hand clawing for the leather-bound ledger that sat inside the open safe. Clara moved on instinct. Years of dodging, grasping customers and navigating crowded dining floors had given her reflexes she didn't know she possessed. Before Grant's fingers could graze the cracked leather, Clara snatched the ledger. She clutched it to her chest, the spine digging into her ribs. "That is my property!" Grant screamed, knocking a crystal vase of roses onto the floor. Water and petals splashed over his Italian leather shoes. "Seize her! She's stealing corporate secrets." Two large men in dark suits, Grant's personal detail, detached themselves from the shadows near the bar. They moved with the terrifying speed of trained predators, pushing aside waiters and guests. "Run, Clara!" The shout came from Lucas, the nervous little manager who had spent 5 years terrified of his own shadow, had grabbed a heavy serving tray. As the first bodyguard lunged for Clara, Lucas stepped into his path, feigning a stumble. The tray clattered loudly, and hot soup spilled down the bodyguard's front. "You idiot!" the guard yelled, shoving Lucas into a table. But the distraction was enough. Clara turned and bolted toward the kitchen swing doors. "Stop her!" Grant was climbing over the table now, ignoring the terrified shrieks of the Instagram models. "Don't let her leave with that book!" Clara hit the kitchen doors with her shoulder, bursting into the chaotic heat of the back of the house. The kitchen was a sensory overload, steam rising from boiling pots, the shout of chefs, the clanging of pans. "Clara!" Chef Marco looked up from the grill, holding a pair of tongs. "What is happening?" "I need the back exit!" Clara gasped, not stopping. She could hear the heavy thud of the bodyguards hitting the doors behind her. She sprinted past the dishwashing station, her shoes slipping on the wet tiles. She could hear the angry shouts echoing from the dining room. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was prey. She burst out the rear delivery door into the alleyway. The night air was freezing, a sharp contrast to the humid kitchen. Rain was falling in sheets, turning the grease-stained pavement slick. Clara didn't look back. She clutched the ledger under her waistcoat to shield it from the rain and ran. She ran past the dumpsters, past the idling delivery trucks, and out onto the busy Manhattan street. She didn't stop until she was 3 blocks away, her lungs burning, her legs trembling. She ducked into a subway station, the familiar grime and noise acting as a temporary shield. She swiped her pass with shaking hands and pushed through the turnstile just as she saw a black SUV screech to a halt at the top of the stairs. She squeezed into a crowded train car, wedging herself between a tired construction worker and a student with headphones. As the doors hissed shut and the train lurched forward, Clara finally exhaled. She looked down at her hands. They were black with grime from the safe's dial, but they were shaking uncontrollably. She opened her waistcoat slightly and looked at the ledger. It smelled of mildew and old tobacco. On the inside cover, in handwriting she knew better than her own, was an inscription. Property of Tobias Vance and Grant Sterling. Project Aegis, 1998. But beneath that, in a darker, more erratic scrawl, her father had written, "Do not trust him. He wants the core. He wants to burn it all down." The train rattled through the dark tunnels, carrying Clara away from the only job that kept her father alive, and toward a truth that might kill them both. Back at the gilded cage, the scene was apocalyptic. Grant Sterling stood amidst the wreckage of Table 4. The safe sat empty, a mocking reminder of his hubris. The patrons were filming him, their phones held up like torches. Judge Harrison, the man who had validated the bet, stood calmly by his table. He picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth. "You have a problem, Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice cutting through the noise. "I have a thief," Grant snarled, adjusting his disheveled suit jacket. "A petty waitress who stole my property." "She opened the safe," the judge corrected him. "Under the terms of a verbal contract, witnessed by 50 people, the contents of that safe belong to her, as does $100 million. Grant turned on the judge, his eyes wild. "You think I care about the money? You have no idea what is in that book. If that book gets out, if she shows it to the wrong people—" Grant stopped himself. He took a deep breath, forcing the mask of the CEO back onto his face. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Find her," he whispered into the phone. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care who you have to bribe. Find Clara Vance and bring me the book. Burn it if you have to." He hung up and looked at the crowd. "Dinner is on me," he announced, forcing a charming smile that looked more like a rictus of pain. "My apologies for the entertainment." But nobody was smiling back. The air in the room had changed. The invincible aura of Grant Sterling had cracked, and through the fissure, something rot and ugly was beginning to seep out. Clara didn't go home. Her apartment, a closet-sized studio in Queens, would be the first place they looked. Instead, she took the train all the way to the end of the line, then caught a bus that wound its way into the quiet, wooded suburbs of upstate New York. It was nearly midnight when she arrived at the Oak Haven Memory Care Facility. The building was a low, brick structure, surrounded by tall pines. It looked peaceful, almost sleepy, but to Clara, it was a fortress of sorrow. This was where the great mind of Tobias Vance was slowly eroding. The night nurse, a kind Jamaican woman named Mrs. Higgins, looked up in surprise as Clara walked in, dripping wet and still in her waiter's uniform. "Clara, child, look at you. It's midnight. Is everything okay?" "I need to see him, Mrs. Higgins," Clara said, her voice brittle. "Please, it's an emergency." Mrs. Higgins saw the desperation in the girl's eyes. She nodded slowly. "He's had a rough day. The sundowning was bad tonight. He was screaming about fire again. But he's asleep now. I just need to sit with him," Clara said. She walked down the sterile hallway, the smell of antiseptic stinging her nose. "Room 304. Tobias Vance lay in the bed, looking smaller than she remembered. His hair, once thick and dark, was wispy and white. His hands, the hands that could once manipulate the tumblers of a bank vault by feel alone, were curled arthritically on the blanket. Clara pulled a chair close to the bed. She didn't turn on the light, letting the moonlight from the window illuminate the room. She pulled the ledger out of her waistcoat. She placed it on the bedside table next to a cup of water. She opened it. The pages were dense with technical drawings, sketches of locking mechanisms, gear ratios, and alloy formulas. It was brilliant. It was the work of a genius. But as she turned the pages, the content shifted. The technical notes began to be interspersed with diary entries. June 12, 1998. Grant is pushing for the IPO. He says the Omni lock isn't enough. He wants to cut corners on the tumblers. I told him no. If the lock isn't perfect, it isn't a Vance. August 4th, 1998. Money is missing from the operating account. Grant bought a new Porsche. He says it's for image. I can't pay the supplier for the titanium. He tells me to relax, says he found a new investor, a shark from the city. September 20th, 1998. I found papers in his briefcase, insurance papers. He took out a massive policy on the workshop, specifically covering fire damage. Why would he do that? We are fireproof. We work with metal. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She turned the page. The handwriting became shaky, jagged. October 23rd, 1998. He knows I know. He looked at me today differently. He asked me to come to the workshop late tomorrow night, on Clara's birthday. He said he has a surprise. I'm scared. I locked the prototype and the original patents in the Kensington black. I set the code to her birthday. If anything happens to me, the truth is in the box. The next page was blank. Clara stared at the empty whiteness. October 24th, 1998. The day the Vance and Sterling workshop burned to the ground. The day the police said was an electrical accident. The day her father was pulled from the rubble with a skull fracture that the doctors said was from a falling beam. But the doctors had been wrong. The trauma hadn't just broken his body. It had started the slow bleed in his brain that became the dementia. Grant Sterling hadn't just stolen the company. He had tried to murder her father on the night she was born. He didn't check the pressure valve. The voice was a whisper, dry as dead leaves. Clara jumped. Tobias was awake. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but they were cloudy. "Dad!" Clara grabbed his hand. "Dad, it's me! It's Clara!" Tobias turned his head slowly. He looked at her, but he didn't seem to see her. He was looking through her, into the past. "The smoke," Tobias whispered. "It was so thick." He locked the door from the outside, Clara. I heard the click. A deadbolt, single cylinder. I could have picked it. I could have. But the smoke. Who locked the door, Dad? Clara pressed, tears streaming down her face. Was it Grant? Tobias's eyes suddenly snapped into focus. For a fleeting second, the fog lifted. He saw the ledger on the table. He sat up, gasping, his hand shooting out to touch the leather book. "The black box," he wheezed. "You found it." "I opened it, Dad. I opened the safe." Tobias looked at her, and a smile of infinite pride broke through the mask of his illness. "My little key," he murmured. "I knew you could. The touch. You have the touch." Then his face hardened. "He will come for it. Grant, he is a wolf, Clara. He never stops eating." "I know," Clara said. "He's looking for me now." "You need—" Tobias coughed, a racking sound that shook his frail body. "You need the second part." Clara froze. "What second part?" Tobias tapped the ledger. This is just the history. The proof of the theft, is in the bank." "What bank, Dad?" "The First National," Tobias whispered, his energy fading rapidly. "Safety deposit box 404. But the key, I don't have the key." "Where is the key?" Clara asked urgently. Tobias closed his eyes, his breathing becoming shallow. "Grant has it. He wears it, around his neck. He thinks it's a trophy. He doesn't know what it opens. He thinks he won." Tobias gripped her hand so hard it hurt. "Get the key, Clara. Retrieve the schematics. Destroy him." His hand went limp. He wasn't dead, but he had slipped back into the twilight sleep of his condition. Clara sat there for a long time, listening to the rain against the window. She had the motive, the ledger, but she needed the weapon, the contents of the safety deposit box. And the key to that weapon was hanging around the neck of one of the most powerful and dangerous men in New York. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a blocked number. Clara hesitated, then answered. She didn't speak. "Clara," Grant Sterling's voice came through the line, smooth and terrifyingly calm. "I know you're at the nursing home. Oak Haven, isn't it? Cute place." Clara's blood ran cold. "I have men 5 minutes away," Grant said. "If you walk out the front door with the book right now, I'll let your father live in comfort. I'll pay for the best doctors. I'll even give you $1 million. Just give me the book." Clara looked at her father's sleeping face. She looked at the ledger. She thought about the fire, the locked door, the 30 years of stolen life. "You said 100 million, Clara said, her voice steady. "Don't play games," Grant snapped. "You have no leverage." "I have the ledger," Clara said, And I know about the safety deposit box. Silence on the other end. A heavy, shocked silence. You're bluffing, Grant whispered. Come and get me, Clara said. She hung up the phone. She looked at Mrs. Higgins, who was hovering by the door, looking worried. Mrs. Higgins, Clara said, standing up. I need you to lock this room. Don't let anyone in. Call the police if you see men in suits. Can you do that? Child, what have you done? Mrs. Higgins asked. I'm fixing a lock, Clara said. A lock that's been jammed for 30 years. She grabbed the ledger, opened the window, and climbed out into the rain. She wasn't running away anymore. She was hunting. The rain in upstate New York was freezing, turning the forest floor into a sludge of pine needles and mud. Clara crouched behind a thick oak tree, shivering violently, watching the nursing home entrance. 2 black SUVs had screeched into the parking lot moments after she climbed out the window. 4 men got out, professionals. They moved with military precision, bypassing the front desk and heading straight for the residential wing. Clara clutched the ledger to her chest. She wanted to scream, to run back in and protect her father. But she knew Tobias was right. If she went back, the story ended tonight. Grant Sterling would bury the ledger, bury her, and leave her father to rot. She had to leave. She trekked 3 miles through the woods to a 24-hour truck stop on the highway. Inside the neon-lit diner, she used the last of her cash to buy a coffee and a burner phone. Her hands were still trembling as she logged onto the internet. The story was already everywhere. Waitress prank or corporate meltdown? Grant Sterling laughs off magic trick at the Gilded Cage. She clicked the video. It was Grant, standing on the steps of the Sterling Tower, looking immaculate in a fresh tuxedo. The fear she had seen in his eyes at the restaurant was gone, replaced by his trademark arrogance. It was a bit of fun, Grant told the reporters, flashing a white smile. A staged entertainment for my guests. The young lady is a talented actress we hired. In fact, to celebrate this little viral moment, I'm hosting an impromptu gala tomorrow night at the Sterling Tower penthouse. We're calling it the Unlocked Party. Everyone who matters will be there. Clara stared at the screen. He was erasing her. He was turning her life-or-death struggle into a marketing campaign. But then she saw it. As Grant raised his hand to wave at the cameras, the top button of his shirt slipped open slightly. Glinting against his tanned skin was a silver chain, and hanging from it, catching the flash of the paparazzi bulbs, was a small, strangely shaped key. He wears it around his neck. He thinks it's a trophy. Clara felt a cold resolve settle in her stomach. He was inviting the world into his home to gloat. He felt untouchable. She dialed a number on the burner phone. "Hello?" a nervous voice answered. "Lucas," Clara said. There was a long silence on the other end. "Clara, oh God, Clara, the police were here. Grant's lawyers were here. They fired me. They said I was an accomplice to theft because I tripped the guard." "I'm sorry, Lucas," Clara said, "but I can get your job back. I can get you more than a job. I can get us justice." "I don't want justice," Lucas squeaked. "I want to not be killed." "Grant is holding a gala tomorrow," Clara said, ignoring him. "He'll need staff. He'll need the best servers in the city to impress his investors. And since he fired you, he's short a floor manager." So, Clara said, watching the headlights of trucks rush by on the highway. "You still have your uniform, and you still have the agency contacts. I need to get into that penthouse, Lucas. Not as a guest, as the one thing Grant Sterling never notices." "A waitress?" Lucas asked. "Exactly," Clara said. "He thinks the girl who opened the safe is a thief on the run. He's looking for a woman in a hoodie, hiding in the shadows. He won't be looking for a server pouring his wine. The Sterling Tower was a 70-story needle of glass, piercing the Manhattan skyline. The penthouse was a fortress in the sky, accessible only by a private elevator that required biometric scanning. The night of the gala, the lobby was a swarm of celebrities, politicians, and heavy security. Every bag was checked, every face was scanned. But the service entrance was different. At 5 p.m., a catering van pulled into the loading dock. Lucas, sweating in his tuxedo, flashed his old ID badge. The guard, who knew Lucas from dozens of previous events, didn't even look up from his phone. "You're late, Lucas," the guard grunted. "Who's the new girl?" Lucas swallowed hard. "Agency hire, last-minute replacement, Maria." Clara stepped forward. She had dyed her hair jet black with box dye from a drugstore and pulled it into a severe bun. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and the generic black-and-white uniform of the catering company. She carried a heavy tray of glassware. "ID?" the guard asked. Clara held out a fake ID Lucas had procured from a cousin in the Bronx. The guard glanced at it, bored, and waved them through. "Kitchen is on the 69th floor. Don't go to the 70th unless you have a tray in your hand," the guard muttered. They were in. The 70th floor was a palace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city. A string quartet played in the corner. Champagne flowed like water. Clara moved through the crowd like a phantom. She kept her head down, offering crab cakes and refilling flutes. She saw the same people from the Gilded Cage, the models, the VPs. They looked right through her. To them, she wasn't a person. She was furniture. And then, she saw him. Grant Sterling stood in the center of the room, holding court. He looked triumphant. He was telling the story of the safe again, twisting it into a tale of his own genius, claiming he designed the puzzle to test the waitress. Clara moved closer, a bottle of red wine in her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could see the chain. It was there, resting against his collarbone, just inside his shirt. She had to get close, physically close. She waited until a boisterous laugh erupted from Grant's circle. A senator slapped Grant on the back. Grant stumbled slightly. It was her moment. Clara stepped forward, timing her movement perfectly. As Grant corrected his balance, she collided with him. "Oh," she gasped. The bottle of heavy Cabernet Sauvignon tipped. Dark red wine splashed all over Grant's pristine white tuxedo shirt. The room gasped. "You idiot!" Grant roared, shoving her back. The wine was soaking into his chest, looking like a gunshot wound. "Look what you've done! This is a $5,000 shirt!" "I'm so sorry, sir. I tripped," Clara cried, dropping to her knees and grabbing a napkin. She began frantically dabbing at his chest. "Get off me!" Grant yelled. But for 3 seconds, amidst the chaos of the spill and the wiping, Clara's nimble fingers trained by the greatest locksmith of the century, found the clasp of the platinum chain. It was a magnetic barrel clasp, tricky but easy if you knew the pressure point. Click. The chain came loose. As Grant shoved her away again, Clara fell back onto the floor. She clenched her left hand into a tight fist. Inside, cold and hard, was the key. "Get her out of here!" Grant screamed. "Security! Throw this incompetent fool off the balcony!" 2 guards grabbed Clara by the arms and hauled her up. I'm sorry! She wailed, playing the part. As they dragged her toward the service elevator, Grant ripped off his soaked jacket and stormed toward the master bathroom to clean up. He hadn't noticed the weight was gone from his neck. He was too distracted by his own vanity. The guards threw Clara into the service elevator. "Get out of the building," one of them growled. "If we see you again, you're going to jail." The doors closed. Clara was alone in the elevator. She didn't hit the button for the lobby. She hit the button for the basement. The Sterling Tower was built on the foundation of the old Manhattan Trust Bank. The original vault was still there, preserved as a historical feature in the basement levels. The elevator plummeted. Clara opened her hand. The key was small, silver, and shaped like a hawk's beak. She had the key. She had the ledger. Now she just needed the truth. The basement was silent, smelling of dust and concrete. The old vault door stood at the end of a long corridor. It was a massive circular slab of steel, a relic of the 1920s. It was locked, of course, but not to Clara. She approached the main wheel. It was a standard dual custody mechanism, but she didn't need to crack the main door. The safety deposit boxes were in the viewing room outside the main vault, accessible to customers. She scanned the rows of brass boxes. Box 400, Box 402, Box 404. It was a large box sitting at eye level. Clara's hand shook as she inserted the hawk-shaped key. It slid in with a perfect oily smoothness. It was a perfect fit. She turned it. Thunk! The door popped open. Clara pulled out the metal cassette. She set it on the viewing table and opened the lid. Inside, there was no money. There were no jewels. There was a thick stack of documents, yellowed with age, and a digital audio recorder, an old brick-sized model from the late 90s. Clara picked up the documents. They were the original patent filings for the Sterling Drive, the piece of technology that had made Grant his first billion. But the name on the inventor line wasn't Grant Sterling. It was Tobias Vance. And underneath the patents was a police report, a suppressed report. It detailed the arson investigation of the Vance workshop. It listed traces of an accelerant found at the scene, accelerant purchased by a shell company registered to Grant Sterling. It was everything. It was the smoking gun. "I knew you were clever," a voice echoed from the corridor. "But I didn't think you were suicidal." Clara froze. She turned around slowly. Grant Sterling was standing in the doorway of the vault room. He was wearing a fresh shirt, but his face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. In his hand, he held a sleek, black pistol. "You noticed the key was gone," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I noticed," Grant said, stepping into the room, "and I knew exactly where you would go. Your father was a sentimental old fool. He always loved this bank." He gestured with the gun. "Give me the box, Clara." "It's over, Grant," Clara said, her hand resting on the recorder. "I have the patents. I have the arson report. I know you tried to kill him." "And who are you going to tell?" Grant laughed, a hollow sound in the concrete room. "The police? I own the police commissioner. The press? I own the networks. You're a waitress with a history of mental instability. At least, that's what your medical records will say after your tragic suicide tonight." He cocked the gun. "Put the box down." Clara looked at the recorder. She looked at the heavy steel vault door behind her. "My father wasn't just a locksmith, Grant," Clara said softly. "He was an artist, and he taught me that every trap has a trigger." "What are you babbling about?" Grant stepped closer. "You never asked why the key was shaped like a hawk," Clara said. Grant frowned. "It's just a design." "No," Clara said. "It's a fail-safe." She suddenly jammed her thumb onto the play button of the old tape recorder and threw the metal cassette box at Grant's face. Grant flinched, firing the gun wildly. The bullet sparked off the steel wall. In that split second of distraction, Clara grabbed the heavy iron handle of the safety deposit room gate, a secondary grill used to lock customers in while they viewed their boxes. She slammed it shut. Grant roared, lunging forward, but the iron bars clicked into place. He was trapped in the corridor, separated from Clara by the bars. But he still had the gun. "You can't hide in there!" Grant screamed, aiming through the bars. "I'm not hiding," Clara said. She held up the tape recorder. A voice crackled from the speaker. It was young Grant Sterling's voice, recorded 30 years ago. "Tobias, listen to me. We burn the place down. We take the insurance money. If you don't agree, well, accidents happen. I'm not letting you stand in the way of my future. I'll kill you if I have to." Grant's face went pale. Where did you get that?" "Dad wore a wire," Clara said. "He knew you were coming that night. He recorded the threat. He put it in the box." "Give it to me!" Grant screamed, rattling the bars. "No," Clara said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was on a video call. "Did you get all that?" Clara asked the phone. On the screen, the face of Judge Harrison, the man from the restaurant, looked back sternly. Beside him sat the chief of police. "We heard it all, Ms. Vance," the judge said, his voice tinny but clear. "And we have the feed from the bank security cameras. Dispatch is 2 minutes out." Grant lowered the gun. He looked at the phone, then at Clara. He slumped against the bars, the fight draining out of him. The billionaire, the titan, the genius, he looked small. "Why?" Grant whispered. "You could have taken the money. I would have given you millions." Clara walked up to the bars. She looked him in the eye. "You broke my father," she said. "You stole his mind. You stole our lives. Some locks aren't meant to be picked, Grant. They're meant to be broken." 3 months later. The Oak Haven Memory Care Facility was quiet. The sun streamed through the window of a private room, a much larger, sunnier room than before. Tobias Vance sat in a wheelchair by the window, watching the birds. He looked cleaner, healthier. The new experimental treatment, paid for by the restitution funds from the Sterling estate, was helping. He had more good days than bad now. Clara sat beside him, peeling an orange. "Did you see the paper?" Tobias asked, his voice raspy but lucid. He pointed to the newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Sterling Empire Crumbles. Billionaire indicted on fraud, arson, and attempted murder charges." "I saw it, Dad," Clara smiled. "They say the daughter is taking over the patents," Tobias said, looking at her with a twinkle in his eye. "Starting a new firm. Vance Security." "She is," Clara said. "But she needs a consultant. Someone who knows the old ways. The touch." Tobias looked at his gnarled hands. He flexed his fingers. I might have a few ideas left." Clara took his hand and kissed it. "I know you do." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, brass object. It was the Kensington black safe, the small one from the restaurant. She had bought it at the police auction of Grant's assets. She placed it on the table. "I still can't get the timing on the third tumbler," she teased. Tobias laughed. It was a genuine, happy sound. "Move over, kid. Let the master show you how it's done." Clara watched him work, the sunlight catching the dust motes in the air. The debt was paid. The lock was open, and for the first time in her life, Clara Vance was free. Wow, from a waitress being mocked to the CEO of her own destiny, Clara didn't just open a safe. She unlocked the truth that buried a corrupt empire. It just goes to show, you should never underestimate someone based on their uniform. You never know who is holding the keys to your destruction. If you loved this story of justice and revenge, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. If you found a key around a billionaire's neck, would you have tried to take it, or would you have taken the hush money? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.